Oh, kia ora. How many times have you heard somebody say, I can't wait till things get back to normal? I certainly get it. Even as a person who loves change, I'm craving for normality and stability in my life right now. Even early on in the pandemic, you remember how people used to begin talking about a new normal that we would all find. But nothing has been normal since the start of the pandemic. Consider like this year compared to even last year, radically different. And the only thing that seems normal is actually disruption, month after month of disruption. Today is Vision Sunday, and as we take some time to look forward to the future, there's this question we need to wrestle with. What if God doesn't want us to go back to the way it was? So it's not that the past was bad. Pre-pandemic as a church, we were enjoying a season of growth and joy and momentum. As a family, we settled into our new home. Our kids were enjoying new schools. I'd just been appointed the new leader for Auckland Church Leaders. And what's more, I knew what was on my calendar every single moment of the day. But everything just seems to have changed. The past couple of years have been full of disruption after disruption. And I think we have to ask, what if God wants to use this disruption to do a new thing? So we're in this season reflecting on the first 15 chapters from the book of Acts. It's an amazing story, isn't it? To see a group of 120 ordinary believers who sparked this global movement in just 30 years. And we're highlighting these 9 seismic shifts that led to this global movement occurring throughout the known world. So far, we've honed in on a couple of these. The first was about mission. The what? Seismic shift number 1 about the kingdom. The gospel is placed into the hands of ordinary people. And rather than get distracted by timings, people, or politics, or challenges, simply point people to Jesus through what you say and do. And then the second shift was about the how. Spirit. That you have the Spirit dwelling in your life, bringing the power and the presence of Jesus to renew your work, home, and neighborhood. So at the end of Acts 2, we saw this amazing story of a 2,500 growth rate as the church went from 120 people to 3,120 people. And that might kind of give us the idea that everything was smooth sailing for the church from there on in. But we would be wrong, because there were huge challenges and disruptions that came their way. And as you follow along in the story, we find that there are these disruptions that happen. In fact, I would be encouraging you to follow along this story. It's kind of a gentle reminder about our devotional guide so that we can kind of keep up with these things together. Today, I want to hone in on Acts chapter 8, one of those stories. You see, for the first 7 chapters of Acts, the stories all take place in Jerusalem. It was like the HQ for the early church, the focus of all their activity. The problem, of course, is that Jesus had given that really clear vision back in Acts chapter 1, verse 8, when he said, "You will be my witnesses, telling people about me everywhere in Jerusalem, throughout Judea and Samaria and the ends of the earth." And guess what? 7 chapters after Jesus gave this mission, the church is still centered in Jerusalem. And that makes sense, because this is where the early church followers, this is where they lived, this is where they worked. And while things stayed like they were, they continued to live within those constraints. But a massive disruption radically changed the scope of their mission. Listen to what happens here at the beginning of Acts chapter 8. A great wave of persecution that day swept over the church in Jerusalem, and all the believers except the apostles were scattered throughout the regions of Judea and Samaria. You might remember those 2 areas from Acts chapter 1, verse 8. We continue reading verse 3. Saul was going everywhere to destroy the church. He went from house to house, dragging out both men and women to throw them into prison. So all the believers have been scattered. It's incredibly disruptive. And here's also this man called Saul who's out to destroy the church, dragging men and women into prison. And in fact, the verses just before this, back in chapter 7, speak about the martyrdom of Stephen, and Saul is right there overseeing the whole thing. It's a scary time for everyone in the church. And if I was a pastor at this time, I would have had every reason to fear. On a personal level, I'd be concerned about the safety of my family. I mean, where are they going to live? Are they going to be arrested? Am I going to be arrested? Am I going to be dragged away? At a church level, we'd be kind of thinking through about how's the church ever going to survive this? What might happen? We don't know where people are. We don't know what's happening in their lives. People's jobs are all up in the air. We don't even know where they are and what's happening. I can't think of a bigger disruption to life than what they would have experienced right here in Acts chapter 8. And of course, we can ask that question. I mean, how could anything good ever come out of something so horrid and disruptive? But glance your eyes down here at verse 4. But the believers who were scattered preached the good news about Jesus wherever they went. These believers lived out the first two shifts that we've seen already, kingdom and spirit. See, just because they weren't able to gather just as they had done before, just because things weren't normal in their lives anymore, just because the culture was now against them, just because they didn't have the stability that they once knew, their focus is on what they did have and what they did know, the gospel of the kingdom and the Spirit who indwelt them. So wherever they went, they preached the good news about Jesus. And guess what happened? Multiplication. That's our third seismic shift. The movement rapidly grew despite the disruption, even because of the disruption. See, Luke gives us a story about how this happened. He says, Philip, for example, in verse 5, went to the city of Samaria and told the people there about the Messiah. He says, crowd listened intently to Philip because they were eager to hear his message and see the miraculous signs that he did. Remember, Samaria is one of those regions Jesus had called them to go. And yes, it took persecution, but now they're actually there because of this persecution that happened. And so Philip witnesses what he knows. He shares this good news of the kingdom, and people respond. And Peter and John come to check what's happened, how these ordinary believers have now embraced the kingdom message, and the Spirit of God, we read, comes onto these ordinary believers, just as the Spirit came on people back in Acts chapter 2. It's reminding us how these seismic shifts happen for all people. And then interesting, the very end of the story, as we come into Acts chapter 9, look at what happens to Saul. Remember, Saul, we read earlier back in beginning of chapter 8, is dragging men and women to prison for their faith. But immediately after this event that we read about in Philip and Samaria, we read how God miraculously disrupts Saul on his journey, where he's actually on his way to have believers arrested. And Saul is utterly transformed into Paul the apostle, the key leader in this multicultural growth of the church. And again, this disruption leads to rapid multiplication. You see, who would have ever thought God would use disruption to multiply a movement of the gospel? You see, from this event, there were significant shifts that took place. There was a shift in locale where the temple is no longer the core gathering place for them, but rather they're now meeting in homes throughout different cities. It's a shift to decentralize the church. So rather than the church centralizing in Jerusalem, churches are now popping up everywhere throughout all these different cities. There's a shift here in ethnicity that we'll see in Acts as well. As the church moved from one people group, Jewish, to now multiple people groups. Incredibly diverse. There's a shift in the types of leaders where there's new voices that begin to emerge and they lead in new ways. And guess what happened? Well, believers multiplied, missionaries multiplied, churches multiplied. And within 30 years, this groundbreaking news of Jesus touched every city of the known world and began to transform every sphere of culture. You see, the story of Acts, it shows us how God can use disruption for gospel multiplication. And this is where the story needs to become personal to you and to me. See, what if this story isn't meant to finish at the end of Acts? See, what if God's not finished with us? What if everyone gets to be a part of what God is doing to renew people and places everywhere? And what if God doesn't want us to go back to the way things were? And what if the disruptions that we're all experiencing can actually lead to gospel multiplication? In early 2020, we heard the whisper of the Spirit say, See, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs up. Do you not perceive it? I'm making a new way in the wilderness and streams in the wasteland. It's a beautiful verse. It captured our hearts, our affections, our vision. Little did we know that the month after sharing this verse with you on Vision Sunday in February 2020, that the world would be significantly disrupted because of the pandemic. And of course, we're not celebrating the restrictions or the lockdowns or the difficulties, but a biblical lens begins to change the way we see disruptions. We begin to see how God can use disruption for gospel multiplication. And this year we hear the Spirit whisper to us again. Just after Isaiah says, I'm doing a new thing, Isaiah says, you will rebuild the deserted ruins of your city. There you will be known as a rebuilder of walls and a restorer of homes. The original promise was that God's people, or when God's people are in step with God's purposes, well, then God's people can rebuild what's broken around them. You see, we believe that we're stepping into this rebuilding season. And it's going to take a whole lot of effort from all of us. Rebuilding lives, rebuilding homes, rebuilding places of work and neighborhoods and churches. And that's why our vision continues to be focused in three vision areas that I mentioned last year as we announced our new name of Grace City. And we identified three vision areas around that. You know, in fact, it's a week ago, 1 year this week that we changed our name. It might feel longer to you than that. We spoke about transform people, that we help people restore their identity in Jesus and discover the unique calling God has for them. You see, there's so much misplaced identity all around us. Our focus has to continually be to invite people to personally encounter God's saving grace for themselves and to allow this grace to transform everything about us. And then, of course, transform places. We're empowered to be agents of renewal wherever we are. And that's what we'll do. Or we're supporting people in this. Trying to delete the line that too often exists between faith and work and faith and home and faith and life. And then that third area, of course, was transform partnership. As our church partners with other churches and organizations to foster community and effective mission. You see, for too long, churches have largely seen each other, sadly, as competitors. And our vision is one of churches working together, celebrating the diversity of expressions and using all of our gifts and passions and opportunities to transform every sphere of culture and bring blessing to others. You see, when we step out as ordinary people, empowered by the Spirit, with the gospel in our very hands, we can see this multiplication of the gospel, even when there's disruption happening all around us. So this year, we're beginning 3 shifts all about what it takes for us to rebuild in our city. The first shift is a shift towards hybrid church. So what is hybrid? Well, I'll think about a hybrid car for a moment. Hybrid car is a car with different fuel options. There's petrol and electric. Hybrid church effectively expands the different options that are available to people to be able to belong, thrive, and renew. They're no longer just limited to in-person on-site experiences, but also online. In fact, Dave Adamson, this Aussie friend of mine, defines it this way. He says, hybrid church is a fresh expression of church for a networked society where physical and digital experiences are seamlessly integrated into the lives of society. And isn't a large part of our life now done in a hybrid way? I mean, just think about the way you might shop for your groceries. It's probably a mixture of in-person where you walk the aisles, looking for what you need, or a click and collect, or it might be that you actually get them delivered. And perhaps the pandemic has even accelerated some of the ways that we have changed our habits of supermarket shopping. Well, I think it's just the way we seem to be doing life differently now too. So the beauty of hybrid church is that we're able to offer new opportunities to include more people who may not want to or able to attend in-person gatherings. It might be because of a disability. It might be because they're just worried about the strange place and the strange people that might be in that service. It might be because they're unwell. It might be because they're housebound. It might be that they're away at a family batch. It might be because of their work schedule. A whole lot of different reasons. So what does a shift towards hybrid church involve for you and for me? Well, after the Omicron, virus peaks, we're going to continue to have in-person and on-site services and ministries. That doesn't change. What does change is we want to expand our services and ministries both in person and online. So we're going to continue church online. In other words, it's not a kind of just a backstop for when we don't have in-person gatherings, but we will continue to provide it and invest in it. On top of it, we're going to develop online tools where people can belong, thrive, and renew at times and places that aren't restricted to in-person and on-site. And additionally, we're going to encourage the development of household gatherings. Grace City and My Place as this long-term model where people can invite people who don't know Jesus right into their own homes. See, all this is going to require a shift in our thinking and our approach. My guess is we're going to develop new rhythms and grab these additional opportunities for both ourselves and for our friends to help them belong, thrive, and renew, to meet Jesus, to allow their lives to also be transformed by Jesus. So the first shift for rebuilding is a shift towards hybrid church. The second one is a shift towards multi-site. Now, multi-site church is simply a church that meets in more than one location. In many ways, we already function as a multi-site church. We have different service times, a growing hybrid expression with online and households around the city. But we believe we need to create new in-person gatherings around our city to enable people to gather at a location closer to where they live. It's best to think of these locations as additional mission outposts, enabling people to invite their friends more local to where they live. They're these mission hubs that are able to strategically allow people to renew the neighborhoods right around where they live. I like to use the phrase big little church to describe this. Providing the benefits of big, but keeping the feel small, becoming more localized, becoming more connected. This past year, we have, as you know, enjoyed our collective, where we have gone through our Mosaic series with the story of Joseph, Follow the Star. Remember how we did that with a couple of other churches. And during this time, we've enjoyed a growing relationship with Summit Church in East Auckland. And sensing the Spirit's prompting midway through this last year, I put a proposal to their leadership team. And I asked them whether they would consider having Summit become part of Grace City, effectively beginning an East Campus that we would call Grace City East. And it led to a lot of healthy discussions and dialogue and dreaming about possibilities. And three questions that we asked, kept right in front of us were, well, could we accomplish more together than separate? Would our community be better served by coming together? And of course, is this where God is leading us as churches? And the leadership teams from both Summit and Grace City answered with a resounding yes, yes, yes to all three of these questions. Following this, our Grace City board began the needed financial due diligence. And once that was satisfied, we formally invited the leaders of Summit to consider being adopted by Grace City, taking on board our mission, our vision, our values, and becoming a hub in East Auckland. This last week, their wider leadership team gathered all of their volunteer leaders to hear about that proposal. And today, Summit will hear about this proposal just like you are hearing it today too. Now, this proposal doesn't mean it's happening right now. And this is obviously a big step for Summit. And it requires the congregation to pray and reflect and then ultimately vote on the 3rd of April. But meantime, we asked some of their leaders, along with our leaders, to give their thoughts around this proposal. What makes this proposal so exciting for our leaders? Here's what they have to say.
Over many years in business, I've experienced good ideas and sometimes not so good ideas, and this one is a good idea.
Things I've learnt in my time professionally is that you need to work with the head and the heart of people, but also you've got to capture people's imagination.
Well, I actually went along with Jonathan to Summit to hear him preach this one Sunday. And on the way there, he said, hey, Nath, we're having lunch with the elders afterwards. I thought, good, a free lunch. I love it. And it actually turned out that he was talking about this proposal to the Summit elders. And I was dragged along. And I thought, wow, this is such an exciting thing because 2 is better than 1.
My first thought was, what a wonderful opportunity for 2 different communities to come together and unite over a shared vision and values.
Again, we thought that it really makes sense at a head level, but also at a heart level, because there's so much commonality in our churches.
We'd been looking for a senior pastor for a while, so my first thoughts were, is this kind of the second best option now? But obviously, as we've come together as churches and seen the idea grow, it's become really exciting.
It sounded like an interesting journey in terms for Grace City and for Summit. But also immediately the other side of my brain says, okay, there was the cautious side, and so that was in terms of the financial impact and the resource impact. Now, I've been on the integration subcommittee for Grace City, involved in this project, and I've been able to satisfy those concerns as I've gone through the due diligence process.
As Grace City, we've been looking to go multi-site, and so this is really encouraging for us as a church as well. I was also really excited because it get to adopt the church that I grew up in, my home church.
I am most excited to learn from the Summit team and what they do in their next gen space.
I've loved the opportunity of already working together in some capacity. And I just wonder what God will do in the space when we're working together.
You know, my church family will be expanding potentially. And so getting to meet new people and seeing how God is using them.
I'm also really excited, particularly for youth.
Combined youth nights, combined family camps. I just think about our leaders as well, where we can get the leaders from Summit, Grace City East, together with Grace City here and just talk about, dream about things, talk about potential for what we can have. We can grow with each other and learn from each other.
You know, sharing resources, gleaning off each other.
So I had the privilege of being able to visit Summit. Through attending that service, I learned so much about things that we can be doing better in our church.
What an opportunity to further the kingdom of God.
Being a multi-site excites me. You know, there is a similar approach to Grace City. There's similar theology. There is a sound financial structure, and they're good people.
There's some challenges. No doubt there'll be some we can't imagine and that we'll bump into just naturally, and just we're dealing with human beings and diversity of locations and people.
As we go, we'll be working through those together. Really grateful to have quite like-minded churches. You know, we really value the same things. We serve the same God, and I think that's really promising.
You know, I love to solve challenges and problems, and I'm looking forward to working through that process.
This is a significant decision for Summit. And so for them, you know, and for their leadership, they've shown that they're leading by God, and also an openness and a commitment in terms of this process of coming to a decision and bringing it to their congregation.
I'm confident that these strengths will come together in order to achieve a greater purpose that God has for us.
Yeah, I think coming together, we're going to have a lot of opportunities to serve with one another and learn from one another.
Great church communities coming together, so obviously learning together, learning off each other, the different staff teams coming together and learning and growing together, but also the potential of Auckland-wide events that we can do together.
Having a greater presence within Auckland.
I think it'll just be a great opportunity to continue to serve our city and to work towards, the Great Commission, to disciple people, to baptize people, to serve people, but in a way broader sense.
To have access to resource and people and prayer and all these beautiful things, I think it's a huge opportunity to live out the gospel in our lives and in our communities.
And I guess for me, I'm in quite a unique position in that I'm in both of these churches and I love both churches. It's a win for Summit, and I honestly can't think of anyone who is more visionary and creative as a leader than Jonathan. You know, he and I have been friends for more than 25 years, and I just so deeply respect him as a leader. And I think as the senior pastor of Summit, if Summit were to come under the umbrella of Grace City, it's a huge win for Summit Church moving forward, and that thrills my heart. At the same time, this is a massive win for Grace City, as Grace City looks to launch into this a vision of being a multi-site church, to start with its first campus outside of Green Lane, to start with an established congregation that's healthy and going well, with wonderful leaders and shepherds, with good, strong finances, and with its own building. It doesn't get any better than that. This is a win for both sides, and so I'm tremendously excited to see what God does as we consider this and talk about this and pray about this together.
I love seeing the energy and excitement from so many leaders. Now, that this proposal, remember, it's not a done deal. It's in Summit's hands, and if they vote yes on the 3rd of April, they will become Grace City East. But if that doesn't happen, our vision is still to pursue a multi-site strategy. Just we'll continue to pray around the timing of the next steps, because that's ultimately in God's hands. So why is it that we think this is a good proposal as leaders at Grace City? Well, if I had to pin it down to 4 reasons, the first is that we believe we can accomplish more together. We're better together. It's the idea in Ecclesiastes 4 that 2 are better than 1 because they have a good return for their labor. You see, together we can create new opportunities like planting new faith communities across our city. Now, our city is expanding and we need more gatherings and churches across Tamaki Makaurau. We can expand outreach initiatives in our communities, our city, across the world. We can develop quality resources and discipleship for the next generation and leadership resources. We can establish a Grace City College at some point to train the next generation of pastors and leaders. A second key reason for us is that we see a strong commonality between our 2 churches. You can see 7 areas I've jotted down here on the screen, and we can see others as well. And I think this affinity that you can see here is ultimately because the founder of Summit and myself actually go back many years, probably around 20, 25 years. You already know his name. His name's Brad Carr. He's well known to us because he's one of our teaching team. Brad stepped down from being the senior pastor of Summit early 2019 when Brad sadly suffered some burnout. And though the church has sought to find a new senior pastor these past 3 years, they haven't been able to find a really good fit. Now, Brad and I have known each other for that 20 to 30 years and both graduated from the same seminary. We've served in the same church for a season. And we've met each month over the past 16, 17 years, sharing life on life and ministry aspirations together. So it makes sense that our DNA is actually really similar between these 2 churches, which is one of the reasons our leaders think Summit is such a good fit to be adopted by Grace City. There's a third reason that we see, and we see specific benefits for Grace City. You see, Summit will have their own lists of what they see as benefits, but we also see some pretty good benefits for ourselves. After all, it's a whole lot easier, isn't it, to begin our first multi-site via adoption than beginning from scratch. Summit brings with it this established presence and good reputation in the community through schools and neighbourhoods that they have served for some time. They have a strong local leadership. They have brilliant staff, brilliant leaders that will become part of our team here at Grace City. There's good financial and system health. In fact, our Grace City board conducted this careful due diligence and from that found a positive cash flow. There's an established ministry centre. They own the ministry centre is called Kutahi Community Centre, which would give Grace City this physical presence out east to expand our ministries that we already have here, like Alpha and English classes and our Cap Debt Centre. And then, of course, our fourth reason is that we believe God is in this. Psalm 127 says, unless the Lord builds the house, This builders labor in vain. You see, we sense the Spirit of God in this proposal. We sense it in the linking of hearts around a common vision of what's possible. We sense it in the ease of discussions, the shared dreams. We sense it in the providence of God, where we could build these relationships during our collective season, giving us a chance to get to know each other more. Now, I would imagine you'll have a range of questions as to what this might look like too. And two things that can help you with this. First of all, we've produced an e-booklet that you can download through the link on the screen or in the host feed right now, or even using your QR code. And while this is written for the Summit congregation, it probably provide a whole lot of answers to the questions that you might have as well. And then secondly, we've got a Q&A next Sunday night at 8 p.m. for everyone who attends Grace City. They can kind of come along, ask any question that you want. You see, as we look to rebuild, we see these three shifts. It's a shift toward hybrid church, a shift toward multi-site, and of course, there's one more to talk about. It's a shift towards serving the wider church. Now, this shift actually began a couple of years ago when I was appointed leader of Auckland Church Leaders. It's so exciting and humbling to see how God is igniting a desire for churches to come and work closer together for effective mission. So I want to keep you in the loop of what's happening around the greater Tamaki Makaurau. First, we're now in the process of forming pastoral networks around our city to ensure pastors are able to connect in the regions and areas that they live in. We're gathering leaders from diverse churches to begin shaping a decadal vision for our city. And additionally, there's been a range of media engagements where we're seeking to convey a positive, united voice on radio and TV. We also have this Easter devotion coming up on the 6th of March, so on Wednesday. It's a chance for us to hear from church leaders across different denominations and ethnicities and sizes as we go through this Lent or Easter reflections together. And I'd encourage you to subscribe through the links on the screen and through our social media. You know, all this comes out of our vision as a church for transformed partnerships, because we realize that a divided world needs a united capital C church, to see churches coming together with this shared vision of a flourishing city, embracing the gospel that's placed into the hands of ordinary believers who are empowered by the Spirit. All this is designed for us to see tangible expressions of the kingdom in your lifetime and in mine. You see, when this happens, we will see churches filled with a diversity that embraces the riches of the culture so prominent in our city. Churches serving side by side, upholding the name of Jesus together. Christian business leaders influencing the economic systems of our day. The marginalized being served by those who have more because they're driven by a shared heart for God. The next generation finding their voice and purpose in the great call of the gospel. Creative gifts awakened and valued to bring honest reflection and hope to our city. Additionally, we'll see people who are praying for governmental and civic leaders who check in on their neighbors and who make sacrifices to nurture their families. And we'll see communities of faith that embody aroha noa, a love without constraint. You see, what begins in us can overflow into every sphere of culture and every part of our city. Because remember, Jesus taught us to pray, your kingdom come. Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And as we step out with the gospel in our hands, empowered by the Spirit, we can see radical and tangible expressions of that very your kingdom come in my lifetime and yours, regardless of the disruptions around us. So yes, there are big disruptions happening, but we believe that God can use such disruptions for bigger things. And it's what Seismic shift number 3 is all about. Multiplication. That you and I are called to multiply God's kingdom even in disruption. God empowers you to fulfill this call. So you and I are part of something bigger than the circumstances, so that even disruption becomes fuel for greater mission. See, friends, this is the story of Acts, and it can be our story too. But it doesn't happen automatically. One of the things I have seen again and again in life and ministry is that two people can face the exact same disruption and crisis. One person becomes hardened from that and divisive. the other person is transformed by the grace of God. And the difference is not the disruption. The difference is how you respond to the disruption. Will I be open to what God might be doing amidst this season? Will I be open to what God might be doing to multiply a work of the gospel? Or will I push against this moment and the possibilities amidst the problems? My prayer for you, and actually for all of us, is that the seismic shifts that characterized the early church would actually shape who we are at Grace City. Kingdom, spirit, and multiplication. And as we navigate our way through this disruption, may we see a shift towards hybrid church, a shift towards multi-site, and a shift towards serving the wider church. And just as God used 120 people in that upper room to multiply God's kingdom, you and I are called to multiply God's kingdom. Even in disruptions, God empowers you to fulfill this call.